Hello, and welcome to Waves of YA, a podcast focused on young adult literacy, brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Teen Literacy Workgroup.
Welcome to the Waves of YA podcast. This month's discussion is books that we are thankful for. Should be coming out right in time for Thanksgiving, so very timely topic. My name is Summer, and I am the librarian for teenagers at the Long Beach Island branch.
My name is Casey, and I'm the teen librarian in Lakewood.
And I'm Chris. I am over in Island Heights.
All right, guys, let's jump right into it. Let's open with a very basic question. What books are you thankful for? If you want it, we can each talk about one. These could be books that you're thankful for in general, or they could be books from your childhood, any time of your life.
I would say the book I'm thankful for is probably my favorite comfort read, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. People who know me know I love horror, but my first love was fantasy. So The Hobbit is just a fun read to go back to. It's not too serious. There's nothing too scary or whatever. It's just fun. I love it. So I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Lord of the Rings, definitely on that list for me as well. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, I'll just say I'm thankful for Lord of the Rings as well. I've read it a couple times, and it's also I'm very thankful for it because it's something I share with my father. That's a love we both share. He's read all of them and all the other posthumous works. He's very knowledgeable about it. So when I was reading it for the first time in high school, if I had any questions, he would answer them, and we talk about it a lot. Also, my wedding was Lord of the Rings themed. My wedding band is the One Ring, basically. So I'm very thankful for Lord of the Rings as well.
Real quick on the topic of Lord of the Rings, and I'll let Chris go. I'm sorry. My best friend is getting married October 5th, so it'll pass by the end of this. And as a gift, I got her Arwen's necklace that she has, and she gives to Aragorn as I'm her maid of honor, so I got it for her to symbolize, their everlasting love. And we met through Lord of the Rings, so
that's awesome.
That's so cute. So I love Lord of the Rings, the extended movies, DVD specials. I took 22 years to read them. I started 6th grade and did not get through them until 2 years ago. So I love them. They're not on my list of things I'm thankful for. My number one is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. I read it in 6th grade when I was failing to read Lord of the Rings, and there's nothing like a weird middle school girl and the book she reads then to be bonded forever. So that is my book. I was the weird kid and I was like, I get it. I'm the outsider. It's definitely did not murder anyone, but just fell in love with that book. And I reread it every few years and ugly cry every time I read it. I own multiple versions of the movie. Saw the play, which is fantastic. Have it stay gold tattoo everyone that's obsessed with the book does. That is my comfort book, even though I'm upset. I want to read The Outsiders because I can read it in a day. It's a super fast read. And then I'm going to ugly cry all of my feelings and then feel better.
I have 2 Lord of the Rings tattoos. So, yeah, that's true.
Getting a matching Lord of the Rings tattoo with my friend before her wedding. We're getting Tolkien's insignia.
That's really cute.
Oh.
And another question is, are there any books that you were really thankful for as a kid? And you brought up The Outsiders, but you can talk about any other ones. One thing I was thinking about was the Spiderwick Chronicles that I read as a kid. They are technically young reader chapter books by Holly Black, but that was my introduction to Holly Black. And then later when I realized she wrote more stuff other than the Spiderwick Chronicles, I was like, okay, I'm all in. And I always loved fairies and scary fairies, nice fairies, any kind of fairies. So that was, I'm really thankful that I read those because they introduced me to Holly Black and that world.
And she's a local girl.
A local girlie, yes, she is.
I love whenever she's we went to delicious orchards and all these different local places. I'm love this. I know where that is.
Yeah, every time they listen to this podcast, we talk about Holly Black, and we're one day she'll be on.
Yeah. She's still writing.
Yeah.
It's doable.
What about you, Casey?
I have no idea what the name of this book is. Whoops. But my grandma, I was the only grandkid that used to sit on her lap and let her read to me. It was a book of fairy tales. There was Rip Van Winkle, which was my favorite. There's something kind of like the Corduroy Bear. And I was thankful for that because it got me close with my grandma. who I'm still very close with, and we had that time where she could read to me when I was little.
That's so sweet. Story time is so important. I always make sure to tell parents that. I'm like, well, because I feel like parents are doing a lot and they don't always get appreciated for it. And I'm like, just the fact that you're reading to your kid is going to be very important to them, and it's very important for their developing brains. It's so important. Story time's so important.
Yeah, I actually have on my list 2 picture books that like were read to me in school for story time. It's The Big Orange Splot by Daniel Pinkwater and Mrs. Rumphius by Barbara Cooney. Like I didn't think about it for like a long time. Like they just kind of like rattled in the back of my brain of like I just really liked them. But The Big Orange Splot is all about like making the house that you want to live in, and it's like very anti HOA. And like I started like looking to buy houses, and I was like, we can't have an HOA. And I like brought home The Big Orange Splot and then proceeded to read it to my partner and be like, this is why we can't have an HOA. I read this as a small child. Yeah. And like, this is my values on a house ownership of like, we don't have to look like every other house. And like, we found like a neighborhood that's very into decorating for holidays and stuff and like goes all out. And I'm like, correct.
That's amazing.
And then, and then Mrs. Rumpus, she like goes on all these adventures around the world and travels and makes the world a better place and becomes a librarian. And I'm like, yes.
That's
I want to do that.
You bringing up picture books made me think of, I was trying to think of picture books, and there's this one book, and it's actually out of print. I only have recently purchased them for myself on eBay because I wanted them all, and they're the Scary Godmother books by Jill Thompson.
Oh, I used to love the movies.
Yes, oh my God. So it's about this little girl named Hannah, and she's really scared to go trick-or-treating because she's afraid of monsters, and her big cousin, whose name is Jimmy, tricks her into going into this spooky house where she gets scared and she meets her scary godmother, who takes her away to the world of Halloween called the Fright Side. And she meets monsters and skeletons and vampires, and she learns that like monsters are scary, yeah, but they're not mean. And I just loved that so much. And like I love the art and the aesthetic, and I was always like a kid that loved spooky stuff. I love spooky and cute stuff, and that hasn't changed. So I purchased all the books for myself recently on eBay, and I love them so much. But they're not a good story time book. They're in comic format. I would love to read them to kids, but it would just take too long. Do you guys want to read any of the other questions?
Sure. How about which books are you grateful for as an adult?
There's so many answers to this question. This is not a YA book, but
librarian.
This is not technically a YA book, but I do classify this as a transition book. So a book that is technically adult, but is perfectly, I think, accessible for a teenager to read, and that's The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. And I love it because it is a book about books and about loving reading. It's about this college student who gets embroiled in this mystery surrounding this book of fairy tales, and he finds his way to this place called the Starless Sea, which is sort of like an underground labyrinthine library, and there's a lot of myth surrounding it. And it's a very strange book, and there's a lot of stories within stories inside of it, a lot of different timeline stories, but I read it like at least once a year. It's so beautiful to me, and it's, again, like a comfort read, so I would say that's definitely one of them.
How about you, Chris?
Ooh, I feel like I really like F.T. Lucan's, not F.T. Lucan, T.J. Klune. They're like linked. Like I feel like you read F.T. Lucan's YA queer fantasy, and then you graduate to T.J. Klune's adult queer fantasy stuff. So like they're linked together, but like I feel like a lot of adult books are like it's a mystery, like so into their boxes. So I like F.T. Lucan's for doing something weird and different, and like being different. And then I just read Shark Heart, and I can't remember the author. Like it's not like the world's best written book, but she wrote a book about a woman's husband turning into a great white shark. And like it's all a metaphor. Yeah. But like it was like so weird and so different. I'm like, I could see like, hey, I'm turning into a shark as a YA book, but like this woman taking this risk and like getting it published even. And I'm like, not the world's best book, but I am glad it's here because hopefully that opens the door to more books that are weirder for adults and like having cooler adult things, because like we're all aging up, we're all adults here. We're like,
yeah,
give us the weird books that we used to get to read for YA, make them for adults, because I care about the high school problems, but like I want like the weird like bizarre things but for adult problems too.
I agree. Actually, I feel like there is a genre of books that I call weird fiction, and I'm actually reading one right now, and I'm going to recommend it. And again, I feel like thinking about what I've read so far, it's very accessible for teenagers. There's nothing to anything in it, but it's called The Parliament by Amy Pokwatka. It's about this woman, and again, she's an adult, but she's having adult problems. She feels very isolated. She doesn't really like doing things, but she's trying to get out of her comfort zone. So she's a chemist. She goes to a library. Her friend's a librarian to teach teenagers how to make bath bombs, but also teaching them about chemistry. While she's there, owls surround the library, and they can't leave. They try to leave, the owls kill them. So it's like The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock. So they're trapped in the library because of the owls. They're freaking out because we all know what happens when you're quarantined somewhere. But she's also responsible for this group of middle schoolers, and she's like, I don't know how to talk to kids. So she's having a time. Simultaneously, she starts reading to them from this book, this fantasy novel she loved as a teenager called The Silent Queen. So the chapters alternate between what's going on in the library and the book, The Silent Queen, which is a fantasy novel. It's sort of a book within a book. And at this point, I haven't finished it yet. I don't know how the stories intersect, but I'm really excited. It's really good. And you said you brought up weird books, and that's definitely a weird book. And I think it would be really accessible for teen readers as well.
My answer for this question, I have two. One I read in high school, which is Dracula. I read it in 12th grade. I'm very grateful for it because I read it every year in October now, just because I love it so much. It's a great classic. Still holds up, still pretty scary, kids. And then my other one I'm really grateful for is there's not too many adult themes in it, so I think it's kind of okay, is Sandman. I read that, I think, a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and I was like, how have I not read this before? I was so hooked on this book series.
Yeah.
They're comic books, and they're just, oh my god, they're so good.
Sandman comics are very good. I feel like my unpopular opinion is that I really like the stories, but like I don't love the art style.
Some art styles are better than others. Like some books have great, and then like I think it's the second to last one that focuses on the fates. The art one in that I don't really like.
That's true.
I've only read like volumes 1, 2, and 3 of Sandman. I have been restarting that series every few years. I just get stalled out, and like I don't know if it's the story or the art style, because like I really enjoy Neil Gaiman, and the art style is jagged and abrasive. Like it's not pretty, but like the story itself also isn't pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And I started watching the show, and I got to episode 3 and stalled out, and I'm like, I don't know why I have a mental block on this, but one day I will manage to get through Sandman.
So speaking of graphic novels, I wanted to bring up a graphic novel that I read as like an adolescent and continued reading. And I only recently finished the series this past year. It's an American manga called Bizengast. Pretty sure Chris has read it.
Yes.
I have it. It is all of them except for the 8th one, which is like a mysterious, hard to get volume. All of them are on Hoopla, and they are amazing. And I swear, it's one of those things where like these random books pop out of nowhere, and then the author like never writes anything else again. And you're like, where did it come from? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Where did they come from? Cotton Eye Joe. And it's about this girl named Dinah, and she's having a really hard time. Her parents are dead. She's living with her aunt. She has a lot of mental anxieties and stresses going on. And she's with her friend one day, and she finds this random graveyard that they've never seen before. And she presses like a panel in the wall, and she inadvertently signs a contract saying she has to work for it's called the Sunken Mausoleum, and help the spirits that are trapped there move on. And it is definitely a horror manga. A lot of the images are very scary. Even as an adult, it's like, oh, these are pretty scary images, but I love it. But the aesthetic is so beautiful. The outfits are so beautiful, kind of like Gothic Lolita-esque. But I've never read anything like it before. I've never read anything like it since then. And it was very, I think, influential in forming my interest in spooky things and in Gothic mystery and in just my style in general. I feel like I still think about Bizengast all the time and the aesthetic, and it still informs how I dress to this day, honestly.
One last thing, probably before we move on. I don't read a whole lot of manga, but as an adult, I read my first Junji Ito book, which is Uzumaki.
Oh gosh,
he is so good at creating just these weird, hypnotically horrifying images that you can't look away from. And kids, there is going to be a show on Toonami. It comes out on September 28th, and I'm just realizing that this is going to come out in November, so it'll probably already be out. But
Yeah.
It's going to be on Toonami? I thought it was going to be
Yes.
a Netflix thing. Or it is a
Toonami
Netflix thing
and
already.
HBO Max.
Is it a live action?
Okay.
No, it's all animated in black and white.
Oh, cool. That's cool. I'm pretty sure that Junji Ito invented the page turn jump scare. Which is very cool. Okay, next question. Have you ever recently or in the past reread a book from your childhood or teen years, and did it hold up?
There are two I have in mind for this. The first one I had to look up. So we all know Alvin Schwartz wrote Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but I read a completely different book that I had no idea was by him until I was an adult and I was looking it up trying to find it again. It's called Ghosts, and it's like an easy reader beginning book. And I remember reading it in my first grade class, like we had a school library and we could pick out whatever we liked on the wall. And I would read that one. And the only story I remembered for a very long time was there was this girl who was bullying this boy, and then she somehow died, and then was bullying him as a ghost. So he trapped her in a bottle and put her in the ocean. So they said if you find a message in the bottle, don't open it because it could be that bully girl. And I read it again as an adult. They're like 3-page silly stories for like kids. I would say for second grade, that's who they're meant to scare. So they're not brilliant scary stories to tell in the dark, but the art is still creepy and it's wonderful. And the other one, I was talking with Summer a little bit about this, was the Alchemist series. I was obsessed with it as a kid. I did not read the Necromancer, so whatever number before that is what I read through. And it made me so, like, I had such a nostalgia trip reading through it again.
I recently reread a book that I read, I think it was in high school. I had this one teacher that had like one of those spinning racks that you see at like the dollar store of books, and I'm pretty sure I got it from that. I might have been like in 8th grade. It's called Wicked Lovely by Melissa Marr. It is a series about fairies. Again, kind of like, I would say it's a similar vein to Holly Black. It's like dark fairies. And I never finished the series, but I actually recently purchased them secondhand, and I'm going to because I reread the first one and I really liked it. I actually feel like I got more out of it this time because I didn't remember everything. But I remember the one thing that was interesting is that there is a sort of a love triangle in it, but it resolves in a way that I think is very unique. It isn't your traditional love triangle where one guy gets the shaft and is like a sad boy for the rest of the series about getting rejected. It's a very interesting how they go about it. But it's about this girl who can see fairies. She has the sight, and she's been told that her grandmother and mother also had it, so she's been told her whole life, don't let the fae know that you can see them because they'll kill you. So that's how she operates, and she starts getting approached by this fae boy in a human glamour who he seems like interested in her, like he wants to date her, and she's like, absolutely not. You know, I do not mess with the fae. But he has ulterior motives because he is searching for this long lost queen. Like, he is the king of the summer court. He's searching for his queen. And there's this whole, like, he's been searching for eons, and it's a whole thing about that. So it's very interesting, and I really love the aesthetic. It's very, I call it like early 2000s fairy grunge aesthetic.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
But I had a lot of nostalgia surrounding it, and I was like, God, I hope this is as good as I remember, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm excited to read the rest of them.
So I have two. I reread Otherwise Known as Sheila the Great by Judy Blume kind of recently, like post-college, so like within the past 10 years. I still love that book. Judy Blume, Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, is like a classic forever. Like, that's such a universal experience for girls. But her stuff just like resonates even if it's dated. Like, where I'm like, yeah, I get like Sheila was a weirdo and like obnoxious. I'm like, love it. Love that's like stood the test of time. Like, I'm sure like our grandkids will be reading like Judy Blume books too. And my other is the Harry Potter series. I grew up peak like Harry Potter, like inescapable 90s, early 2000s. Read it a million times. Didn't have friends, just would read it over and over again. I'm like, this is my friend. and tried reading it during the pandemic of like, I can't handle anything new. Things are too stressful. Go back to the old favorites. The story is still so good, but like I have so many feelings now around it because of J.K. Rowling and how vocal she is politically, where I'm like, you've ruined something I love. So like, story still stands, but like it's just tinged where I'm like, I don't know if I can enjoy this as it is.
Yeah, it's really difficult, I found, and I think that a lot of people feel guilt around still enjoying Harry Potter, despite some of the unkind things J.K. Rowling has said online about people. And I feel like, I want to, like, if anyone does feel guilty who's listening to this, I assuage you of your book guilt. Like, it is perfectly reasonable to still love Harry Potter and have fond feelings of Harry Potter from your childhood or from your adulthood, and simultaneously disagree with the unkind things J.K. Rowling has said. Because no one is perfect, but there's plenty of authors out there, especially classic books, authors of classic books that we still read in school, and you can still get a lot of good content from. And you can dislike what the author, like I think Ender's Game is a good example. I think it was brought up that the author was really homophobic or something. I forget the specifics, but you can still like the book, and the book is still taught in schools because it's a staple of the science fiction canon. I think it's about reading critically and keeping your mind open.
And like having complex feelings is part of being human, of like, I will never trade what I got from Harry Potter, of my two best friends of 25 years, my entire career, is because of that. So I'm like, always gonna be thankful and grateful, but I can be like, got a problem with the author, love this story, and like have those feelings of both are valid, even if they conflict, and you have both of them at the same time.
My personal gripe with an author is I love the stories by H.P. Lovecraft.
That's
sorry.
Yeah.
He's one you really have to read critically, because even his stories have twinges of, he was very racist and very xenophobic, so you really have to read and be like, okay, I recognize that this is in here and I need to see it. But on the same side, he's such a influential figure in the horror genre itself, and sort of stapled in cosmic horror as a whole. It's one thing that I liked that happened with it is there's a lot of authors who have kind of reclaimed it from him and turned racism on its head in his works, which is really nice, like Lovecraft Country.
Yes,
and,
I was just thinking that.
The Ballad of Black Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, by Victor LaValle.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I totally agree. It's all about critical analysis, and I think it's really important to formulate your own opinions, even with, like, we hear so much online about this author and that person, and this person is problematic, and this person, but it's really important to do your own research and form your own opinions, because even the information we're getting on that side from the internet can be false and can be tinged with other people's opinions. So keep yourself informed.
Are you looking for a blast from the past? Don't forget to tune into Wheeler Talk, the history of Ocean County, a podcast brought to you by me, the local history librarian. Episodes of Wheeler Talk are released monthly right here on OCL Soundwaves. Learn about the rich history of Ocean County with topics such as shipwrecks, historic storms, Ocean County's role in the Revolutionary War, tales of local hauntings, and much, much more.
Do you guys have any books that you return to if you need a pick-me-up, like a comfort read?
I think I did say The Hobbit already.
Oh, yes, you did. Yeah.
Yeah, mine's The Outsiders, but also the Yu Yu Hakusho manga series is like, when I don't want to read it in a day and cry all my feelings out, like Yu Yu Hakusho is like just fun. And like it's another thing of like that middle school girl bond of like, I liked this in middle school and it's forever. These are my characters that I love and I know the whole arc. Doesn't matter. Like we're gonna have a good time. Like we're gonna be upset when the sad parts happen, but like I know the exciting things and I'm still gonna be happy about the exciting parts.
I was trying to think about this because I have so many comfort reads. But one I really like is Daughter. I always bring up The Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor, who's one of my favorite YA authors and continues to be. She also has a duology called Strange the Dreamer, and she calls it her secret book on social media that she's recently sent to her editor. And I'm like, I would like to know the title of the book, please. But Daughter of Smoke and Bone is a fantasy trilogy. It came out in like 2010. And I actually also reread that a couple of years ago, and that's still really good. But I do find the first book very comforting to read, and I go back to it a lot.
Why don't we move? I already mentioned it in my thankful for one. I feel bad.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can have more than one. Like, I have lots of books that I'm thankful for, honestly. I also reread Twilight last year, and I still liked it. I still think it was good. Twilight gets a lot of hate, and I think it's a lot of nostalgia for me with Twilight. I was very much into the series right before it was a little bit before it became really popular. And every time the movies came out, I went to see them with my cousin, midnight premiere. And then when Blockbuster was still a thing, Blockbuster would get it on DVD. They would have their own like movie screening of it where you could come in with your blankets and sit on like lawn chairs and they'd show it for you. And so I just have a lot of really fond memories of the Twilight franchise. So I'm very thankful for the Twilight franchise. I don't care what anyone says about it. I'll fight them. I'll fight them in an abandoned Blockbuster parking lot.
Good for you, Summer.
They were fun. Like, they reminded me of fanfics. So I was like, these are fun, easy reads. But I had read Anne Rice in middle school. And, like, so I was like, I don't know. These vampires are not dramatic and moody enough for me.
Yeah. Also, I was a target age group because I was, like, 13 when I read it. So I think I was at the right age to read them.
Yeah, I was in high school. But I am super thankful for, like, Anne Rice's vampires. So, like, I liked vampires a lot. And then, like, reading that, probably too young to have been reading that. But, like, this. I love vampires like that. Solidified it.
I still need to read Interview with a Vampire. It's one of those that I just keep putting off.
I've reread that a few times, and like I'll listen to the audiobook to fall asleep, and I was like sharing a hotel room and like had it playing, like I fell asleep and it upset everyone else. They're like, you cannot listen to that to fall asleep. It's kind of like gory and messed up. And I was like, oh yeah, I just know the story, so I know where we're going. It's fine.
Have you seen that meme that's like, people will tell you this is their comfort character and then show you someone who's never had a day of comfort in their lives?
Yes. Yeah, so like that I like to reread. I'm like, I just want essential vampire. I did Dracula Daily last year, and I'm like, it's fun, but I'm like, I want my sad, moody, angsty drama.
Amazing.
Unfortunately, I go for movies than books for comfort, which is why I only have the one. But your statement reminded me, like, one of my comfort movies is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So
oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
I'll watch it and pass out when it's on. So, like, this reminded me of the meme you said.
Which Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Important question.
The original.
Okay, so I love the original. Like, I wrote a whole paper about it in college about it. But I really like the 80s one with Matthew McConaughey. It's not good. It's The Next Generation. It's terrible. And I watched it with my parents as a kid. And my mom, like, really likes Matthew McConaughey. My dad likes horror. So, like, they kind of compromised. I'm like, we'll watch this. And I was like, I love this. This is super fun. It's a movie my whole family watched together. And I'm like, it was pretty gory. And I was like 8.
Nice. I've never seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I like horror. And I was talking to Chris the other day and said that, like, I used to be way more easily scared when I was a kid. And it's only been in, like, my adulthood that I've been able to watch horror movies. But I feel like I'm still a little afraid to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre because I feel like it's really gory. And there's, like, the element of, doesn't he wear, like, a face made of someone else's face?
Well, yes, but the first movie isn't very gory at all. Most of it is left to your imagination.
Okay.
Yeah, it kind of, like, invented, like, really kind of, like, was a catalyst for the genre of, like, based on a true story. Like, it's before the slasher, like, 80s slasher things. It kind of, like, is what shifted into that, and, like, the B movie, just, like, terrible slashers. So it's a lot of off-scene stuff. Like, you'll see someone get dragged screaming into the red room, but you won't see what happens. And it's like the lack of knowledge, which is worse, where you're like, whatever you're thinking is worse than they would have shown.
I will say that there are parts of it that are very, like, the dinner scene is very sort of emotionally charged, where you're like, oh my god, it could give you anxiety, but there's not really any gore heavy moments in it.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, I wouldn't say I'm super squeamish, but sometimes intense visual gore is a little jarring for me, unless it's really obviously fake. Like, I think in horror movies, we need to go back to making the effects less realistic. Like, you're making it look too real, because it's still scary when the practical effects are a little fake looking, but it reminds you that you're watching a movie, and I like that. I don't know if you'll agree.
I like when it's actual practical effects because like some of them are really interesting and cool from a technical point versus like the CGI stuff of like,
I agree.
how did you do that? Like, because some things are like, that is really well done. And they had like some twine in a bucket, but like, and then CGI, when it's like weird, you're just like, I can't stop staring at the weird CGI.
That's true. Our last question is, are there any books that you are thankful that you read because they got you either into reading as a kid or if they got you into a particular genre?
I had like childhood trauma from the Goosebumps show, but in like still likes like spooky things. Also, like my parents let me, like my dad let me watch horror movies way too young, but Goosebumps freaked me out. But the Alvin Schwartz in a dark, dark room with the girl with the green ribbon story is like what got me to reading horror. And then like Christina's Ghost by Betty Wren Wright terrified me. I don't like ghosts are upsetting to me. But like I read every single one of her nightmare scary ghost books, and then that like circled me back to Goosebumps, and I was like, I don't know why I was so afraid of that. Like by the time I had read them, I'd already read much scary things, and I was like, if I had a teacher read me like in a dark, dark room, wouldn't have like gotten into like the scary like kids books.
Yeah.
The only one that I can think of is I tried reading it in middle school or high school, but it was too hard. Was the Silmarillion, which I read in college. It sort of explains the mythology of Middle Earth more. And even though I already love Middle Earth, it sort of reignited a love for fantasy as well as giving the whole world a new depth. So as soon as I read it, I was like, oh, I have to read the other ones, like immediately. So I could see the depth that's in it. So it kind of kicked up a huge nostalgic reading craze.
I was trying to think about this because, I mean, this is my own question that I came up with, but I found it difficult to answer. But I was thinking there's a book I read in high school that I feel like probably, again, like ignited my interest in horror, but also true crime, which is I Hunt Killers by Barry Lyga. I wanted to mention it because it's something that I have recommended to a lot of teenagers at my job, and I think that it's interesting that it kind of came full circle to like it being a book I read as a teenager and then me giving it to a lot of teenagers to read at my job, which is I enjoy. And there's another series I was thinking of. It's called, again, it was just the randomest books, but I got them from the library. We no longer have them. I'm sorry I keep bringing the books like that up, but it's what's going to happen when we're talking about books from our childhood. But it was called the Vampire Island series. Island because it takes place on like Manhattan. And it is their early chapter books. They're like 120 pages. And it's about this family of vampires that live in New York. And the one oldest girl, it's sort of like they came over from like the old country. I'm using air quotes. And they're vegetarian. They're like fruit bat vampires. Like they mainly eat a fruit diet. And they can't really eat a lot of processed food either. Like it makes them sick. And the one is like the oldest girl. She's very into poetry and she's very like, dealing with teen stuff. Then the youngest boy, or might be the middle boy, he's I think the only one that can transform into a bat. Because another thing is that they're kind of losing some of their old-timey vampire-ness the more they integrate into modern society. And he's very concerned with environmentalism and saving the earth. And then the youngest one is almost like the black sheep because she wants to eat meat. And she's more dark and like scary than the rest of them. But there's three of them, and I want to reread them, but I brought them up because I feel like we've spoken a lot about a lot of spooky children's media from our childhoods, and I feel like there's a lack of it.
Yeah.
I get a lot of kids who are interested in scary or spooky books, but until they get to the age where they can read Goosebumps, there isn't a lot of scary media for like young early readers, and I think there needs to be more of it. Because those are the kids that are going to like horror and dark fantasy when they're a teenager.
Yeah, I briefly had that question.
One of us has to start writing scary stories for beginning readers. It has to, one of us has to do it.
Casey, that's your whole thing.
No, not for beginning readers.
Chris,
Our
that's for
local
your
horror author won't write as a spooky story for kids.
Reading for kids is so hard.
Is it?
Yes, because your normal vocabulary, you have to adjust it. So, like,
That's
how you
wild.
might normally say something, you have to put it in a way that a child will understand. So,
Yeah, someone
like,
learning to read. Yeah.
or even like
Oh.
analogies. Like, analogies might be too hard for kids to understand. You might have to think of something that they might compare things to.
I'm gonna read Bunnicula to school kids, and I was reading like the intro forward thing of like, oh, like I'm an adult and I actually read the boring stuff in the beginning now, and I read it like elementary school, and I kind of vaguely remember like having to look up a couple words, and like one of the things that the authors got were letters, questions from kids being like, well, why did you put so many hard words in it? And they're like, we didn't know how to write children's books. We just wrote a book that we thought we were funny and just used grown-up words, which forced a bunch of kids to like learn new vocabulary words. So like, Casey, just make kids learn new vocabulary words.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Also, like, we've stopped as a society carrying around small pocket dictionaries, and we need to bring it back.
That's called your phone.
Yeah, but a young child, this is my opinion, should not have
Yeah.
a phone. A kid just learning to read, 5, 6 years old, should not have a phone. I'm sorry, parents. That's my opinion. Since that's all of our questions, you want to just hype up any last books that you're thankful for, thankful that you've read, thankful that they exist, thankful because they were really cool. Any ones you want to hype up?
I'm gonna hype Fahrenheit 451. And that ties into like got me into a genre because that was the first dystopian I read, and like I found out the library celebrates Banned Book Week.
Nice.
So like I knew about that like as a kid because I was like, well, what does that mean? And like having that explained to me, and like also during like that Harry Potter, like I only read it because it got banned, and my mom was like, well, what's so terrible about this children's book that my kid can't read the book written for children?
Mhm.
So like knew about it like growing up, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Why are you banning books meant for kids for kids? Like, and then there's a whole book about why banning books is wrong, and then the fact that it gets banned because people are upset it talks about burning books, and I'm like, oh, you've missed the entire point of this book.
Yeah, it's like what to be the person that says I'm on the side of burning books. That's a really bold stance to take.
Yeah, and they're like, we should ban this book that talks about how banning books is bad, and I'm like, what? So I'm incredibly thankful for that book. Thank you for writing a book about like my entire feelings about banning books. And also it has this really great line in there that's another one of my tattoos of the magic is only in what books say. Of like, it doesn't matter the format as long as the message gets across. And like, I talk about being an avid audiobook listener where I'm like, yeah. And like audiobooks, graphic novels, the fact that like they don't have books, so they're keeping the books alive through storytelling, which is kind of like we've come full circle back to the beginning, and eventually they're going to get written back down again. Like the story is what's important, not what the media is that conveys it to you.
Yeah, I think a lot about that because I'm always living in like the theater of my mind, and I'm like, what would happen if I was in like a world where printed media didn't exist or like it was hard to access? Because books are such a huge part of my life. Like, how would I survive? And I was like, well, I'd probably either start writing down stories I remembered or telling them out loud. And like you said, that's how they survive.
The book that I thought of, I just read it recently, and it's this author's first book. It's a YA novel. It's called Now Conjurers. It's a really good found family queer coming of age story about some witches who fight this otherworldly entity in order to save their town and maybe their friend, and it's really, really good.
Well, that's really sweet. And I'm glad you brought it up because you said the group of friends. A book I'm really thankful for is The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. Again, another book I reread last year, and I didn't expect that I wasn't going to like it, but I only owned the physical copy of the first one, and I was like, immediately needed to read the rest, so I got them all on Libby because I needed immediate gratification. I couldn't wait for the hold to come in. And I read like 4 of them in 2 weeks, and it was amazing. And that's a book series that me and my best friend read when we were in high school, and so we share that, and we'll always like send each other memes about it. And so I'm very thankful for that book series as well. And another book that I feel like I've hyped up on every single podcast, but it's going to be one of my best books of the year, and that's House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland, just because it was so good. And I try to get everyone to read it because I was blown away by it.
Speaking of Maggie Stiefvater, have you read Scorpio Races by her?
It's on my shelf. I'm going to.
Okay, I love that book. It's like very much like the protagonists are the last people to figure things out kind of situation of
Interesting.
like, and it's like when I worked in Lakewood, I could give it as a recommendation as a clean book because I'm like, everyone's like, get your priorities in order. This book, I'm like, oh, you have your priorities in order the whole time of like, I have to race a real horse against the Kelpies to try and win the money to keep my house. Otherwise, I'm going to be homeless. I don't have
Jeez
time to make friends or like fall in love. Like she is like goal oriented, and then like the boy's like, I need to win this for like whatever. Like he's like an indentured servant, so he's trying to like win back his like freedom from indentured servitude and like the ownership of the horse, so he can keep like winning and making money. And I'm like, I love how both of them are like, I am too busy with my actual problems that like will greatly affect my future and my ability to survive. I don't have time for relationships.
That's really funny. I do like romance in books, but it's refreshing when that's because I do feel like there definitely are books where, despite the fact that I do love romance in my fantasy, that I'm kind of just like, maybe you should be focusing on something else. Maybe you should just wait. Put a pin in it. Yeah, you really like this person. That's great. But put a pin in it. Resume it later. There's more pressing matters.
I hear in my head, I was like at a midnight showing of one of the Batman movies where he has to like fly a nuclear device away. Otherwise, like everyone in New York City is going to die. Or Gotham. It's the same place. And like he starts making out with Catwoman. And I just remember like, and a small child just pipes up of like, you don't have time for this! And now whenever there's like an unnecessary romance drama, I just hear this small child in a movie theater being like, you don't have time for this!
He's right. They were right. That child.
They were 100%. The theater started dying laughing of like this dramatic moment is ruined by this kid pointing out like, you don't have time for this.
Yeah, because he said what everyone else was thinking.
Oh yeah.
So thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Waves of YA, and we will catch you on the flip side.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events. All titles mentioned in today's episode can be found through the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.